Well, welcome to Ecce Romani 2. This is a series of videos that I plan to produce or to make, to record for the second book in the Ecce Romani series. So those of you who are starting starting Latin 2, this is a likely spot for you to land on if you're using that Ecce Romani 2 book. It's a green book. The Cornelii family are now, they've been in Rome, but we're going to see more about their life in Rome. And we're going to be introduced to a fairly large variety of Latin grammar topics, some trickier than others. Chapter 28 starts with Aurelia seated in a chair and being groomed by two slave women. We have, I want to say, Syra and Phrygia. I mean, look at the face right here. This one is obviously terrified because Aurelia can be a severe mistress on occasion. Her hands are trembling, as you'll see in the story. And on this one here, whether it's Syra or Phrygia, she is combing her hair carelessly, and at some point Aurelia gets very upset about this. But the grammar topic for this chapter, chapter 28, is relative clauses. So I wanted to give an example of those in English so you're ready to see them when they appear in Latin. So I'm going to underline these. Oops. And you're going to see relative clauses are really just like a dependent clause that can be inserted into a sentence to tell you more about somebody, something. In this case, the first two are about Aurelia, and the third one is about the slave women who are caring for Aurelia's hair right now. So here we see examples. Aurelia, who is a Roman woman, is now living in the city. This is a relative clause. This is a relative pronoun. It basically just tells you more about Aurelia. Aurelia, it describes Aurelia some more. Aurelia, who is a Roman woman, is living in the city. It can also be something like this. Aurelia, whose hair is beautiful, looks into the mirror. And then we have something about the slave women. The slave women whom Aurelia scolds are terrified. For those of you who feel the word whom is a little outdated, that's fine. But in this sense, you can see how whom works. Aurelia is sort of like the subject of this little clause here, and this is the direct object. And we have that M of whom left over from all the M's in Latin, which we know to be direct objects, accusative singulars, for those of you who have gone through the whole Latin 1 course now. So a relative pronoun has a gender, a case, and a number, just like, say, a noun or an adjective in any Latin sentence. It takes its gender and its number, meaning singular or plural, from what is called its antecedent. And in this case, the antecedent is Aurelia. These W words in English you'll find are very often Q words in Latin, and they have an antecedent. They always tell you something more about somebody or something, as I said. So in this case, the who is the relative pronoun. This whole thing is the clause, and the relative pronoun's antecedent, which literally means comes before or falls before, as it often does, even in Latin sentences. This word falls before or comes before the pronoun that tells you more about this noun, this antecedent. So it takes its, as I say, gender and number from its antecedent. Aurelia is feminine, and she is singular. So is this pronoun going to be. However, it gets its case from how it functions in its own little clause. So if we took this clause out, what we would have is Aurelia is now living in the city, and that makes perfect sense, and that's a complete sentence, and we can just sort of insert this clause into the midst of that otherwise normal sentence there. And just as Aurelia has a case, Aurelia is a subject of this sentence. Aurelia is living. She's the subject of that verb. She's nominative, you could say. So also in this clause, this who, which takes the place of Aurelia, has its case from how it acts in its little clause. So if you think of this as a sentence, who is a Roman woman, this who is actually the subject of this clause. It's not the subject because Aurelia is the subject of this larger sentence. It's the subject because of how it is functioning just in this little clause right here. So in this case, we're going to have a pronoun that is feminine and singular and nominative. And you'll see that that is going to be the word quae. And, you know, there's a chart in this chapter which will explain all of this. Here's the other sentence. We still have Aurelia being the subject of this sentence, right? But in this clause here, the word whose is not a subject. Whose is a possessive pronoun, and it does it still has Aurelia as its antecedent. When we say whose, we're talking about Aurelia's hair. So again, this is going to be feminine and singular, but in this little clause, whose is not the subject. The subject is the hair now. So if you sort of treat this like a sentence, you could say the hair is beautiful. This is the nominative here. And this whose is a possessive pronoun, and really it takes the place again of Aurelia, but we would say Aurelia's hair is beautiful. So this is actually a genitive, feminine, and singular pronoun. And I think you're going to find that this is cuius is the word in Latin. So there we have genitive, feminine, and singular. In this circumstance, this one right here, the slave women whom Aurelia scolds are terrified. The whom, sorry about that, the whom, again, the antecedent of whom is the slave women. We know that Aurelia scolds the slave women, and this whom takes the place of that. So here in this little clause, Aurelia is the subject. She is scolding the whom, you could say. Since the whom takes the place of the slave women, the whom is functioning like a little direct object, and that the fact that it has an M on it, like those many accusative singulars in Latin, should be some kind of an indicator there too. So here we're looking for a feminine because the slave women are the ancilai. So we have a feminine. Now we have a plural. Maybe I could write this one down. Feminine, plural. And we have an accusative because of, again, how this word whom functions in this little clause here. Aurelia scolds whom. So we have accusative here. And that word is going to be quas, as you'll say. And again, there is a chart here. So that's a little bit of an intro here, and maybe I can move on to, I'm going to skip over the story, and I'm just going to draw attention to the fact that this relative pronouns chart is right here. As you see, they can be singular, they can be plural, they can be masculine, feminine, and neuter, and they have cases. So we have all three of those: gender, case, and number. Once again, so here is the chart, which probably will need some memorizing, and I'm going to skip over this short exercise here so that you can see how they actually function in sentences. This exercise asks you to go hunt down certain relative pronouns, and again, notice how many Q's there are here, which W's took the place of in English, although there's a C here, but most of them are Q words. And you have to go back to the story and think about how each one functions, I think, on the chart. Look at the... Okay, so I guess you have to give certain possibilities for what each of these are. But I'm going to skip that one since it's such a short exercise. I will draw your attention that I think that it's good to read through this carefully. It's kind of like what I basically just said but gender and number of its antecedent and case required by the function of the pronoun in its clause, as I just said. Then there's another short exercise here, 28C. And, it asks you to think about those pronouns in context, whether the pronouns are... you have to think about the clause and identify subjects, verbs, and direct objects within those clauses. So I'm also going to skip that. I'm going to go right to 28D, which is really the more substantial exercise here. So here are sentences with relative clauses, and I think I'll do like 2 of these here. Read aloud and translate, then explain the gender, number, and case of each relative pronoun. So I'm going to put this here, 28D, and we'll look at number 1. Sextus est puer strenuus qui saepe in agris et in horto currit. So, explain gender, number, and case of the pronoun. You see that the pronouns have been bolded. So in order to get the gender and the number of each of these pronouns, you have to figure out what the antecedent is. What is this qui referring back to? And in this sentence, it is definitely sextus, or it's hard to say. I mean, sextus and the puer are both the same here. So I would say that puer is the one that's closer to the qui. So we could call the puer the antecedent, even though, sextus and puer both have the same case, gender, and number here. So it doesn't really matter. But sextus is an energetic boy who often runs in the fields and in the garden. So this is the relative clause from qui all the way to the end of the sentence. Again, the main sentence is sextus is an energetic boy, and the qui, or the relative clause, just tells us more about that boy. It tells us something more about what he does here. So qui, we're going to say, is taking its gender and number from sextus. We're going to say it's masculine and it's singular. And in this clause, who often runs in the fields and in the garden, this qui is functioning as the subject of this verb currit, right? If you plugged in sextus for the qui here, if you brought the antecedent back into this world and took out the qui, the sentence here would be sextus often runs in the fields and in the garden. And in that case, again, sextus would be the subject also of this little clause here. So qui is going to be nominative. And I gave you the translation already there, so let's do one more. Now this is also going to be a nominative. I want to do something a little bit different. Let's look at number 7 here. So I'm going to back this up and say 7. Sextus jam cogitabat de omnibus rebus quas Titus heri naraverat. So Sextus now was thinking about omnibus rebus, about all the things, or about everything, but it's a plural here, so about all the things. Quas here is which Titus had told or had narrated yesterday. So here we have to think about quas. So again, here's the sentence. Sextus was now thinking about all the things which Titus had told yesterday. So the quas is the relative pronoun, and we're going to think about what the antecedent is here. Quas does not refer back to Sextus. Titus had told what yesterday? So whatever this is taking the place of, this has to take the place not of Sextus, because Titus hadn't told Sextus. Well, no, I mean, he did tell something to Sextus, but this talks about the things that Titus told to Sextus, not Sextus himself. So here the quas takes the place of this rebus here, about all the things which Titus had told yesterday. If you took out the quas and replaced it with its antecedent, it would be Titus had told all the things yesterday. So quas refers back to omnibus rebus. From this as, we can tell that that is a feminine, and that, if you forget that the word res rei, which means thing, is feminine, I think pretty sure that by looking at that ending there, you can tell that that is a feminine word. Particularly, it's an accusative plural. But so race is feminine. It's multiple things. It's not just a singular thing, but multiple things, all the things. So it's going to be plural. And here it is, as I say, accusative. Titus had told things yesterday. I mean, that's the basic skeleton of this clause here. Titus had told things, all the things, but things in particular. Rebus is the antecedent. So this Titus in this clause, Titus is the subject, here's the verb, and this is the direct object that Titus is telling, right? So we're going to say accusative here. And I've already translated that, so I think with that you have a decent example of how relative clauses work in Latin sentences. In this case, we have a subject, qui, and in this case, we have a direct object, quas. And they can be any case, any gender, and either of the numbers, singular or plural, as you'll see as more of these go by. I think I will stop it there, and maybe we'll have one or two from exercise 28E in the next video.